one of my favorites here. He was always one of those well-rounded students, into everything, and he's, proved that you can be involved in other stuff, not just computer science, and still be quite successful. Jamie was in a band, and that's how I think we kind of got interested, because my son also played guitar, so I was always interested in Jamie's band. He's wrote music, managed the band that he was in, so it is possible to do other things and stay in tune with your computer science, although I think you took the long plan here. That's okay.
That's fine.
We had more fun together. So that's kind of my introduction of him, but we just see them from the bio. I can tell you that he has worked through Microsoft in San Francisco. He joined Go Guardian. Is that a small startup? From there, he went on to NFL. Yes, NFL, and on now to you're with System 1.
Yep.
Okay, and so James going to just tell you about life after graduation and difference of small and large and what to do to be successful.
Perfect.
Right?
Thanks, Margaret.
Okay.
How's it going, everyone? Let me see if this works. Okay, dope. How's it going? I'm really excited to be here. I grew up in Windsor. I moved here when I was about 5. I went to St. Joseph's High School. I took about 5 years to graduate University of Windsor, and it's been 5 years since then. I haven't been back home here for probably 2 or 3 years now. I'm actually back for my friend's wedding, so I wanted to make the time to talk to all you people here. When I was putting this together, I was really thinking about the kind of stuff I wish I kind of heard when I was going through school, because going through school was pretty tough, and hopefully I can kind of inspire you guys. Out of curiosity, who saw Rami's presentation last week? Did anyone see the Facebook one? Okay, cool. Dope. Yeah. So me and Rami are best friends. We've been friends for 15 years now. We both went together at high school. Out of curiosity, before I started, did anyone have any questions coming into this at all? Okay, cool. Just want to make sure I have time and leave room for questions. So to start off, I'm going to go over my story over the last 5 years, the different companies I've worked at, some of the kind of career things I've chosen, then go through some of the lessons I've learned. Now, these aren't really technical lessons. These are more the people lessons I kind of wish people would have told me beforehand. And then I'm going to leave room for any sort of really specific questions and answers. So if you have any questions while anything's coming up, just keep it on the back of your head and just ask at the very end. So my story so far, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've worked at a few different companies. This all started in my 4th year of computer science. So back when I was taking computer science, our program was a lot smaller, and not very many people were going to work at the big tech companies. There was no one really in the program who's working at Google or Microsoft or Facebook or LinkedIn or any of those big companies. So at the time, I wasn't really thinking about even applying. In the back of my head, I figured, I'll probably move to Toronto. Maybe try to work at a startup in Toronto. That was kind of the plan at the back of my head. That all changed when my friend Scott got an internship at Seattle in Washington, and at the time at Amazon. And at the time, that was a big deal. And he's getting paid American dollars, doing an internship there. I remember when he told us he got the job, my very first thought was, well, if Scott can do it, I can. I'm smarter than Scott. So from there, that's when I applied for Microsoft on a whim and managed to score an internship there. And I told my best friend, Rami, that I got the job at Microsoft, and Rami had the same reaction. He said, well, if Jamie can do it, I'm smarter than Jamie, I can totally do this too. And from there, he worked his way up and ended up getting a job at Facebook in Los Angeles just about a year ago. So that's what I really want to get across here. This is a very hot job market right now. It is incredibly doable to get a job at one of these big companies or these well-known startups if you have some sort of engineering background. They're really desperate for really good, competent software engineers. From the Microsoft internship, I came back to University of Windsor. I had to finish up my last semester. And I'm not going to lie, I had kind of a bad attitude with school at the time. So unfortunately, I ended up failing one of my classes in my last semester. Don't do that. make sure you study, because it caused a little bit of issues with visa stuff. Because I didn't have the 4-year degree, I wasn't able to go back to the States right away to work a job there. But it all ended up working out because I ended up working at Red Piston in Windsor. And from there, I met one of the best front-end developers and one of my closest friends now. And I'm actually coming back to Windsor again in 2 weeks to stand at his wedding. So that worked out from there. After I graduated, I finally had my 4-year degree, I wanted to really move to Los Angeles. And that was a really specific lifestyle choice. I spent time in Silicon Valley at Microsoft, and while that place is great, there's just too many engineers for me. And I really wanted to, I still in the back of my head wanted to be a rock star and play lead guitar, play bass in a band. So I figured the tech job market is just as good as, well, the tech job market is also really good in Los Angeles, not quite as good as San Francisco. But if there's any chance of me being a rock star, it's going to be in Los Angeles. So YOLO, let's give it a shot. And I started applying for jobs in Los Angeles. I was using a website called Hacker News, news.ycombinator.com, which was kind of like Reddit, but where all the tech people were hanging out. And from there, I met the CTO of a startup in the comments, and I sent him an email directly. And I remember sending him the email and flying down for the job interview, and they didn't have an office. This company was about 9 months old. They only raised about $100,000 of funding from one of the co-founders who just wrote a check. The CEO and the CTO were all my age. We're all like 24 or 23 at the time. And I took the job because I really wanted to move to LA. And I spent the first month and a half sleeping on the floor, sharing the room with the CEO and the CTO. So we had like a little curtain in between. And we grew from 11 people to 15 people. And once we got to 15, the engineers all kind of shared the same bedroom. We worked out of there. I was there when we got our first $1 million in revenue. We hit about $1 million in revenue about a year, and went from a couple $100,000 a month in revenue to over $1 million a month in revenue. So it started growing, and it was really crazy. Ended up being one of the fastest growing education startups in the United States. So that was a really fun, crazy experience because I was there at the absolute ground level. From there, I had the opportunity to join the National Football League. And I found that job the same way I found the GoGuardian job. I was just on Hacker News reading the comments, and the VP of engineering from the NFL posted saying they were looking for people with JavaScript experience. And I sent him an email, and I was able to get an interview through there. NFL was an absolute blast because we had a lot more people working there. The team that was doing the same kind of thing I was doing at GoGuardian, there was a team of 5 people instead of just me by myself. So we had a lot more people and resources where we could do more like deep engineering work instead of just rushing to get stuff out the door as quickly as possible. At the NFL, I was part of the team that launched a new NFL.com homepage, which I don't know if you remember the old homepage from a few years ago, but it was absolutely drastically better. And I was also part of the team that made the testing and deployment pipeline for the new NFL iOS and Android app. After NFL, my boss got a new job over at System 1. And I really liked working with my boss, and I found in my experience that when you have a good boss, that's like 90% of the battle. If you ever work somewhere where your boss hates you or you hate your boss, you might as well just find another job because you're never going to get promoted, and it'll be really annoying to work there. So I jumped ship. I joined System 1 after my boss quit NFL. And System 1's cool. We're an ad tech company. So the entire business model is about spending 10 cents to buy an ad on Facebook or Snapchat or Taboola or one of these sources, and then driving them to a web page where there's different ads or more ads on it. So I work on the quiz websites. How many guys have seen like take this quiz and we'll tell you which Harry Potter character you're most like. Okay. Or like, tell us your Taco Bell order and we'll tell you what Sex and the City character you're most like. That's the stuff I work on right now. And it's pretty fun because it's a surprisingly high amount of engineering goes into these funny little quiz websites because we're optimizing, we spend more than half our time writing code to optimize ads. Ads kind of, is everyone familiar kind of about like the stock market and the stock exchange? So ads work in the same way. There's a bunch of different stock markets basically for ads, and we write programs that programmatically buy and sell ads and put them on these quiz websites. So it's pretty fun. That's the kind of summary there. But most importantly, I play bass in Virtue, which is my band in Los Angeles. And if you guys were here last week for Rami's talk, he's over on the right over here. So I make sure I still do music stuff on the side. We're working on a new album right now, and that was a big reason I moved to LA, was to be able to balance like doing cool, fun programming, software engineering stuff, like 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and still doing music stuff on the side. And this brings me to my first point. Relationships are absolutely everything. The friends I made at university, I'm still friends with today. And I made sure that I hung out with all the smart kids, and all those kids, well, now they're grown up now, are working at big companies or working at cool startups. And we still reach out to each other like all the time. And they're in town too for Rami's wedding too, so I'll be able to see them as well. A lot of people say it's not who you know, it's what you know. And that's kind of half true. Because I found that if you get really good at some sort of skill like engineering or sales or marketing, it really helps for you to meet other people. So a good example is, because I'm a software engineer and I have a highly technical background, I'll bump into friends of friends in the music industry, like record producers, booking agents, different artists. And because I can deliver value by helping them out with their WordPress site, like doing quote unquote really basic stuff for all of us, that allows me to form those friendships. So I found it's important to spend the time, get excellent at engineering, but also spend the time, get excellent at the communication side, and spend the time and form those relationships. Both are really important. Another good tip I found is only listen to people that have accomplished what you want to accomplish. Now I find this a lot with like aunts and uncles or grandparents who will give unsolicited advice. If you want to be a millionaire, you got to listen to someone who's a millionaire. Don't listen to your aunt who makes like $40,000 a year or is into a bunch of debt. If you want a really great personal life, really great relationships, don't listen to a millionaire who doesn't have those relationships. Listen to someone who has really great relationships. If you want to be in a band, listen to someone in a band. This sounds really obvious, but I found especially with friends and family, sometimes we let our friends and family like kind of guide us instead of picking the path on our own. So it's really important to be conscious of that. This is another really important one. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And you've probably heard this one a lot. I stumbled onto this by accident. While I was in university, I was the dumbest person in the group of smart people. So I made sure I found all the kids who were doing really excellent, and I always hung out with them, and I was always part of their study groups. And I made sure I surrounded myself with people who are up here. So average to me in my paradigm and my perspective was that level. That's another reason I really recommend moving to one of the big tech hubs like San Francisco or New York or Los Angeles or Seattle, because those big cities like attract other really like motivated, like self-disciplined, really big go-getter people. And when you're around those people, what you consider average or good starts being pulled up. This is like the number one thing that's helped me a lot. It's also important too, it's not only about working really hard, like I'll hear that a lot, it's all about working hard, it's also about picking the right things to work on. And I struggled with this early on too for engineering. Now, what I mean by that is you want to focus on things that either, on the business side, either increase revenue or decrease costs. Now, on the engineering side, this is how you'll find some companies will value engineers drastically more than others. A good example is ads increase revenue, which is why I've been really focusing on the ad tech side lately. Infrastructure-related projects, anything to do with AWS or Azure or cloud computing, that's all about cutting costs. That's about having that $500,000 a year AWS bill and using your engineering ability to figure out ways to reduce that to like $200,000 a year. And the other thing is any sort of business software, anything like Salesforce plugins or marketing tools to help increase revenue is super important too. When I first started, I focused more on doing like really hard engineering things that didn't necessarily move the needle on places, and I was having a hard time career-wise getting the promotions or going from that. It's when I found this kind of tidbit of information that something clicked in my head. And I started focusing on working on the projects that brought in more money or reduced costs or something that I could show moved the needle. And this goes to the show and tell side is really important. So while I was at NFL, I did a bunch of cool technical stuff. We worked on React at the time when it just came out. We made React Helmet and React Metrics and all these really, really popular open source projects that still thousands and thousands of people use every day. The business did not care at all because we didn't have any sort of graph that proved that the cool engineering stuff we were doing was increasing sales. And part of that was the way the NFL.com website worked was all the ads were sold by a person. So it didn't really matter how fancy the website was as long as the Hyundai logo loaded beside the NFL shield when Hyundai checked the website. Versus now I'm working at System 1, we don't have any ad salespeople. We write programs that buy and sell the ads for us. And because of that, the engineering team gets a lot more respect, we get a lot more resources, a lot more leeway, and we can work on cooler engineering projects. So for big companies, at the Googles, the Facebooks, like the Amazons, and even like some of the more well-known startups like Airbnb, even when I apply to these companies now, they don't really look at your resume that much. They really, really, really focus now on these technical interviews. When I did the interview over at Facebook, well, no, not Facebook. No, I did an interview over at Nextdoor a little while ago, and it was for one of the ad tech related positions. And my resume had all these different, like very business specific ad tech related stuff. Didn't even check the resume. They went right into the screening question, which they asked me to program tic-tac-toe in front of them over the phone. And I guess I ended up not doing it fast enough, so I didn't pass the screen. So I really recommend, especially now you're in school, while you're interviewing for these bigger tech companies, just go to leetcode.com, do at least one problem a day, ideally more, and just drill it. Because there is a pattern to all these interviews, and it's the only way you can get good at it is practice. Just like the only way you can get better at math is just by drilling problems. Luckily, if you're like me and you have a little bit of trouble with this, there's plenty of other places that will hire you too if you're smart and friendly. When I was in my last year of school, I probably did about 10 or 15 phone screens for places in California. I flew down out of those 10 or 15 phone screens, I had about, I think, 4 in-person interviews. So I flew down to San Francisco twice for 4 interviews. And out of all those interviews, I got 0 jobs because I had trouble with the technical side. However, eventually, it was a numbers game. And when I ran into GoGuardian in Los Angeles, we just really got along on a personal level. Since it was a really, really early stage startup, it was really, really important that we got along, because it was almost like starting a band or like even dating somebody, because I was going to be living with these guys. They're more focused on like getting along and being able to do the job just enough. So I really recommend, don't be afraid to apply places because you're afraid of getting rejected, because you really want to, if you're not getting rejected your first 4 or 5 jobs, you're not applying to cool enough places. That's what I told myself to really push myself. And if you do get rejected about 3 or 4 times from like Google and Facebook or whatever, it actually gives you a lot more confidence, because when you go into the next job, you're not really worried about failing the interview because you've already got rejected a couple of times. And you realize everything's fine afterwards. Finally, the most important thing is to have fun. Like I said, I went to Los Angeles for lifestyle choices more than anything else. Life after school is really great. Working, I have a lot better time working than I did in class. And it's really fun out there, especially if you put in the time and work now. Focus on those, like studying the tech interviews. Focus on really making your time here about growing and getting better. It pays off in dividends afterwards. All in all, my name's been James Hush. Like I said, it's not all about what you know, it's about who you know too. But luckily, since you all are here, you now officially know me. And I take high priority. I always go out of my way to help anybody from Windsor, because I know how hard it is to get across. So if you have any questions whatsoever, this is my personal email address. Also, if you don't remember my email address, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I check that a lot. But thanks again for your time, and I really appreciate it. Cool. Does anyone have any questions? What's up?
So say we're a fresh grad just coming out of a Canadian university.
Cool.
And we want to go to the US to work.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of barriers are we going to face that American citizens don't? Right?
So the big barrier is the immigration side is a bit tricky. It's really, 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 really doable. It's not too tricky, but it's a bit tricky. So you need a very specific job title to work in the United States. I'm technically a computer systems analyst on paper for my TN, and I'm switching my job title to like application software developer because I'm switching to another work permit. But it's really not that hard to get a TN if you have a 4-year degree. It's about $65. And the big thing is when you're applying to jobs, and if they ask you need sponsorship, and you're Canadian, just say, oh no, it's fine, I just have to get a work permit. For any sort of sponsorship questions, I recommend waiting until the very end of the interview, when you have the job offer, to start saying that kind of stuff. Because if you sell yourself well enough in the interview, and it's a decently funded startup or a big company, they'll figure out how to get you. Does that kind of answer your question? Okay.
I have a question.
What's up?
Okay, so it was mentioned that you work for GoGuardian?
Yes.
Okay. How did you scale it to 200 million requests per day?
Oh man, that's fun. So we had no idea what we were doing when we were working there. We're all
And why did you get 2 million requests per day for what GoGuardian is doing again?
So GoGuardian, the startup I was working at, we did internet filtering for Chromebooks for K-12 schools. So remember whenever you were in high school or grade school and you wanted to go to a website and it was blocked and it was really annoying? That's what I did. And the reason why we had so many requests was our little competitive advantage was it was the best filtering software for Chromebooks because it worked on the client side. But for it to work on the client side, it meant every 7 to 9 seconds, it would send a request to our PHP server telling us what websites the kid went to and some other analytics and stuff. And we would use that analytics to show a dashboard to IT, being oh, Steve tried going to this porn website, we blocked them.
Okay, hold on. Are you saying you scale up a PHP server to 200 million requests per second?
Yeah, oh man, it was crazy.
Okay.
So the reason, when we came in, the place was because so that's the idea. It had to write to the database. Also, the technology choices were all the wrong technology choices because the original version of this website was made by the CEO, who was not a computer science grad. He was a psychology grad, and he made the whole website on GoDaddy at the time, and just really basic PHP and jQuery. So we came in, first thing we did was we took the one server and we split it up into multiple. We made, on AWS, we cloned that server out and set up auto-scaling groups. Because we knew the traffic, like kids would come in to school starting about 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning, California time. So the traffic would always go up and it would always go down after school. That was really helpful because if stuff broke, we had like 14 hours to fix it before they came back into school again. So first we split that up, set up auto-scaling. And then luckily, we did all this logging on a MySQL database, which you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to use like something like a Mongo database or something like that for logging. Luckily, we just paid Amazon a ton of money and used their biggest database, and that bought us about 6 months. That bought us summer vacation. Summer vacation was our favorite because nobody used the product, and that's when we'd have 3 months to like try to cobble everything together. So over summer vacation, we thought about like moving off MySQL entirely. We tried doing that for a few days, and we thought, oh man, we don't have enough time to do this. So the trick we found was, because we know each school was really only looking at their own records, we took the MySQL database and we split it up into a bunch of different databases. So we had one database just for LAUSD, because they were our biggest customer. And then we split the database up to about 4 or 5 other databases.
So you did some shredder.
We did sharding.
Demand, right?
Pardon me?
Based on the demand, which customer interesting, which
And luckily, because of the business, we knew about how many students were showing up. We could get away with making kind of a sketchy engineering decision because we knew from the business case it wouldn't have to change. And then after I left, they ended up going to a completely different system. I think they ended up using like Druid, which is some weird Netflix database. But that's how we fix it. Like in startup land, it's all about like you just got to get it working for the next 3 months and then move on and then buy yourself time to get it working to the next step. So that's how we got around doing that.
But do you think your computer science degree helped you actually in doing that, or it doesn't matter?
It definitely didn't hurt.
Come up with the idea of shredding the data, because this is something they teach in software engineering.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, but
Didn't cover it here. That's the difference.
we did. No, I remember like even just the absolute basics of we have this pipe of data. We can't put any more data down here. We've already paid it. We're using Amazon's biggest database. And just remembering, I can split this up. Like absolute kind of like basic stuff that you end up learning here. Versus if you didn't have that background at all, you just wouldn't have thought of it. Or you wouldn't even know what to Google. That was the big actually takeaway that I noticed is the CEO who made the original version did teach him just enough. He taught himself enough PHP and JavaScript to like get it off the ground, but he didn't even know what to Google to fix it. So he didn't know how to Google like how to shard MySQL database because he wouldn't have even thought of that. So having the background really helps you know what to Google next and really puts you further ahead. Does that sound about right? Yeah.
So one advantage one thing that you can put in your resume that you can say I can know how to use Google. It's very important. It's a skill.
Yep.
Any more questions?
Let's see. What's your question?
How much, besides your undergrad courses, did you work on side projects or other courses? Or did you do anything?
So I worked a lot on side projects. So I graduated with like a B average because all my practical classes, like anything where I had to make a website, I destroyed. I rocked it. Absolutely rocked it. It was like the prettiest website. It was great. Anything with the math, I barely passed with the skin of my teeth. So I was working on a lot of things on the side because I've always been entrepreneurial. I was a concert promoter back in university, so I liked the idea of figuring out ways to make money without just working for someone. At the time, I actually did a small startup called Cassagem, and we did a CRM system for home healthcare companies in the Ontario area. And with that idea, we were able to raise some money. But right when we raised some money, that's when I got the internship for Microsoft, and the internship at Microsoft paid more than the money we raised. So I had to go. So I taught myself back 7, 8 years ago. It was Ruby on Rails was a really hot thing. And so I went through all the tutorials, taught myself that because I really wanted to get a job at one of the startups. So I was trying to learn the technologies there. I think the main thing for side projects is don't get hung up on making side projects for the sake of side projects. Really find stuff, and this sounds super cliche, but really find stuff you're curious about and you want to build. So for me, I really like building websites. I really liked doing the CSS and doing business stuff. Versus I had one of my other classmates, Adam, he made this StarCraft Brood Wars AI API where you can write programs to do some complicated computer science-y AI stuff with StarCraft Brood Wars. And that, for me, I didn't want to do that at all. I wanted to make more website stuff. So when picking languages and kind of things like that or side projects, just pick stuff you're interested in. Don't necessarily pick stuff that's the highest in demand. Because if you're really curious about machine learning, give it a shot. Because if you're curious about it, you'll actually work on it. Does that sound about right? Okay. What's up?
Going back to the previous question about the scaling, you had a sharded database.
Yep.
So didn't you needed a GSM, a global shard map,
We had a application layer that we made in what's the one we did it in Scala.
Oh, okay.
That was when we switched program languages all the time there. Looking back, that was kind of silly, but it was fine. So we had an application layer that basically took, when the requests came in, we had a Scala microservice, and I set up all the infrastructure with the Docker side and the deployment side. So the requests would come in. We saw they were, for example, they're part of LAUSD, go to this database. They're on the East Coast about this school district, go to this database. And that alone bought us another 6 months of time to make a better solution.
All the requests were still hitting the global shard map, right? So do you have multiple
We had multiple instances of the application server that would scale up and down. So a good trick for the scaling is changing the problem to something where you can scale horizontally. Because if you can scale horizontally, then you're good for almost ever. It's just really expensive. But when you're in a startup, if you're making more money than what you're spending on your infrastructure, that's fine. Because you can always figure out ways to cut down costs of your infrastructure later. What's up?
I heard that when you join a company, it's better to stay there for at least 2 or 3 years, because if you leave companies for less than a year, finding the next job would be more tough, because they would think that you can't work in a team.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make any problem if you leave companies in less than a year?
Yeah. So the number one tip here is don't quit your job until you find another job lined up. That's number one. No matter how bad it is, stay at the job until you have another one. Even if the market's hot or whatever, it's because emotionally and socially and mentally, you'll have a much easier time to negotiate when you already have a job offer. I was actually offered a job. I went through some interviews. I probably do interviews once every 3 months or so just to see, friends of friends. And I was offered a job a few months ago, and it was easy for me to negotiate because, for example, they asked me what the salary were. I was like, oh, no, just give me a number. But it was easy for me to negotiate because I had a job to go back to the next day. I ended up not taking it because I liked where I was, but I tried to interview to keep up to date. For the question of, does it look bad if you switch jobs for under a year, under 2 years? It really depends. A good example is my friend Rami, and I have a a couple other friends who've done this. They'll work at a startup and they just run out of money after 9 months. And so like the whole team gets fired. So in like the California area, like staying at a job for a little bit less than a year isn't as bad because they know all these companies just go in and out of business. I
think it depends on your position.
It depends,
Say
yeah.
you're running a team and you just quit after 3 months, no one will hire you to run another team.
Yeah.
But
And
if you have a junior entry position, that's fine.
but it's not a hard rule. So for example, when I was at Red Piston, I knew I was only going to stay there until I got my degree because I had to finish one more class. And I was offered a job in California for more than double money. So of course I didn't stay because my end goal was to go there. But if you're getting paid fair, you don't have another job offer, and you just want to quit because, oh, this is stupid, that's bad. Don't do that. Does that kind of answer your question? I know it's not, I wish I could say like, this is always true or this is always false, but it's one of those, it kind of depends. What's up?
So just getting back to like averages and like side projects.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if like do companies really like look into averages, or is it more always side projects or what they? Like,
Oh, nobody looks at grades.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a 4.0 or like a 3.9 or something crazy high, definitely post on your resume because it doesn't hurt. But for the big tech, is this more like for the bigger tech companies?
Just like companies.
The big tech companies and the well-known startups, they just care about whether or not you pass the technical interviews. And so studying those algorithm classes and studying the leetcode.com problems or the cracking the coding interview problems, that's all they care about, especially coming out of school, because they're interviewing people from like Canada and the United States and England and like China and India and all the like. We have like a 98. Like I think we're numbers here or letters. My transcript actually had letters and numbers and different places of different grading things. So they just give everyone the exact same interview process, which is those technical phone interviews where they'll say, "Here's a problem, code it out for me," or "Here's a problem, fix it on the whiteboard." The startups and agencies look a little bit more at the side projects because they just need someone who can just do stuff like as quick as possible. And startups and smaller agencies love hiring new grads because they know the new grads are going to be cheaper than hiring someone with experience, which is fine because when you're just graduating, you're just looking for something. But I would really focus on those like leetcode.com problems. Try your best to get into one of the big companies. And if you don't quite get in, just start interviewing at the other places.
How should you negotiate your salary?
Get 4 job offers. Get 3 job offers. That's the first salary is the best way to get leverage is you interview Amazon, Facebook, Snapchat, Google, startup A, startup B, and you work really hard to try to get 4 job offers.
So do you think working for a startup company better or working for a big company as your first position?
Depends. So the main key is you want to work with really smart people because you really want to go long term. And that was one of the mistakes I made. I was like I had no patience. I had no patience in my early 20s. And so I was chasing that like, oh, let's get like $4 million in the next 2 years. You want to really do long term. So I learned that now at NFL. It was very strategic that I went from NFL to System 1, even though NFL had a higher brand name and kind of higher status than System 1 because my boss went there. And my boss is the kind of person who I want to do long-term stuff with. And I knew if I jumped across to a smaller kind of company with my boss, like I'd be set up for success longer term because I'd already have that relationship. I wouldn't have to convince him to do certain things. I could say, like, I could come in with him and be like, oh yeah, remember we did this at NFL and it was great? He's like, okay, cool, let me do it. So there's, for the startups and big companies, when I went to GoGuardian, I just had a really good feeling. Like I knew these would be good people. And I just really wanted to move to LA and I was trying to find a job anywhere at that point. So that's why I jumped there. Generally, the bigger companies do pay more right away. But I also have close friends who stayed a little bit longer at GoGuardian than I did and are multimillionaires now because the company sold. So you really got to go with your gut, if that kind of makes sense. I wish there was a hard or fast rule. I recommend interviewing everywhere. And when you get the offers in front of you, like at the end of the day, go with your gut feeling. Because you got your whole life. It's fine. The other great thing about education and relationships is you can take all my money and everything away from me right now, and I'll be able to be successful again in the next year because I have the relationship. You can't take away the fact that I know how to code, and you can't take away like the friends that I've built up over the years. So it's really focusing on the long-term. Try to find those people that you want to do long-term stuff with long-term people with, because those, even if it's at a startup or an agency or Microsoft or Google or anything, when someone quits and joins another job, and they have a really good opportunity, they'll pull you along. So that's the key there. Do you have any other questions? No.
So what is Facebook and Snapchat and Google, like what are they good for in people who qualify for like a junior software engineering role? Because I'm having a hard time like consistently getting, I'm okay with Amazon, but like Facebook, Google won't get back to me.
They won't get back to you?
Yeah. So what do you?
Oh, they're not like even giving you the phone screen?
No.
Okay, cool. Send me a message, and or send Rami a message. Were you at Rami's talk?
I was at Rami's talk. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Did you send him a message?
I didn't.
Yeah, send him a message. He'll get you an interview.
Oh, okay.
Dead serious. Dead serious. I got, because Facebook never got back to me. I've interviewed at Facebook twice, failed twice. No big deal. I'll never forget the difference between a stack and a queue ever again because I screwed up the phone screen. The first time I got the phone screen at Facebook like 5-6 years ago is because I was friends with a guy I met at a party while I was in Silicon Valley. I think we just got drunk at a party together, and he's like, "Yo, if you ever want a referral of Facebook, let me know." And then he referred me, like serious. But for any of those big companies, if you like, reach out to Rami for sure for Facebook. He'll definitely hook you up. Or like reach out to me, and I might, like I have, like there's other University of Windsor alumni who work at Google. Here's another great trick. If you go on LinkedIn and you send a message to anyone from University of Windsor, they will 6,000% help you, like instantly. So I've done that trick a little bit with LinkedIn and just finding people from Canada, and feel like, hey, I'm from Canada, and instantly we're friends. Like, it's so crazy, like the most simple stuff. So yeah, to get the Facebook interview, send a message to Rami, and then all they're looking for is if you pass the technical interview. They're just looking to see if you can do those lead code problems.
Not even really like side projects, because like I'm good at building like web apps with React and
Yeah.
like. Okay.
No, they only care. Yeah, it's kind of weird because I've done a lot of stuff with React. I've worked on a bunch of like pretty popular open source projects, React, and they only care about passing, for the bigger tech companies, they only care about passing the technical interviews. Good news is that's in your control because that's just work. That's just you like on Friday, Saturday nights, you're just doing the questions over and over and over again. The bad news is you can't use your charm as much, which I usually lean on quite heavily. So for example, at Facebook, me and Rami, best friends. I'm going to be best man at his wedding tomorrow. Even then, I still had to do the phone screen, and I still had to do the technical questions. So, to get in the door, reach out to someone on LinkedIn or me or Rami. Like, I have enough. Like, there's enough of a network now at U Windsor that you should be able. If you reach out, you'll be able to get the interview just by like emailing people. That's how you get in the door, like for the interview, and then you just study leetcode.com over and over and over again, and then keep trying. Oh.
So you seem to really enjoy yourself at the different companies you're at. Was there anything you didn't like or any areas that maybe you messed up that you learned from? And what did you
Yes.
take away
I really messed up at Go Guardian because I took things too personally and I took things too seriously. And I was working on the wrong things. That's when it started clicking together. So usually at startups, especially when you're all the same age, like the manager doesn't really know what they're doing because like you're all just figuring it out. So it's that being the difference that really from a junior engineer to like a more senior engineer is knowing like how to affect the business outcome. So what I should have done at Go Guardian was I should have found some metric, because that's when I first started getting into the automated testing side. I should have found ways to measure how long, for example, testing and building was taking, creating a chart or graph for that, and then working on different tasks to lower that, to speed up the velocity of the team. Or I should have found ways to set up some sort of analytics to track user engagement on the dashboard or something, and then work on engineering stuff to change that up and down. What I did instead was I was working on stuff that didn't really matter, and we were so busy just trying to work fast, we didn't realize which things mattered and which things didn't matter. So that was the real key, and that's not a technical thing. And a lot of engineers struggle with this because we want to go in and like actually do the work or actually fix the problem, and we don't want to spend the time to like analyze it or set up the tracking, because oftentimes the tracking and setting up these charts and graphs takes longer than actually fixing it. But that was the big one. I wish I would have done that.
So you spoke a little bit about when you started in LA,
Mm-hmm.
you were living with everyone.
Yeah.
But how do you find getting a start in LA now that you're at like a established company? Like, are you still living with a bunch of people? Or?
Oh no, I have my own apartment now. I've been in Los Angeles for about 5 years now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was the first, I think about a month and a half, 2 months that I lived with all the guys. But it was great. It was like, it was great because when I moved to the States, I had no credit history. That's a fun little thing. So I couldn't borrow any money for anything. Luckily, I had some money saved up because I was doing some contract gigs beforehand. But like when I moved there, I basically spent all the cash I had on like getting a car and getting furniture for my apartment. So that like 6-week, 8-week buffer of not paying rent by just sleeping on the floor helped a lot.
I'm interested in HR questions. How
Sure.
do you handle them? Like, for example, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Give me an example of a mistake you did and learned from it.
Sure.
That's kind of nice question.
So those questions are a lot easier for me to answer because, so for like the behavioral questions, those are dirt simple. You just type like top 10 behavioral questions in a Google. Honest to God, this is what I do. Honest to God. I do this on phone screens too. This is a good tip. Where do you see yourself in 5? Tell me about yourself. They always ask that question. What I do on the phone screens is I have a bio written up. And depending on if it's a front-end job, I have a bio written up with a front-end story in the middle. That's exactly 5 minutes. If it's a back-end job, I have the same bio and I switch to the back-end story. If it's infrastructure, same one, switch to an infrastructure story. I honestly got to have that in a text document in front of me while I'm on the phone. So the behavioral stuff, I have probably like a 4 or 5 page Google Doc of every behavioral question I can think of and just a perfect answer.
Will you care sharing it?
Pardon me?
Will you share those files?
Yeah, send me a reminder. I like just to see the idea. But I had when I was doing the tech screens, I had like the big O complexity, like those things all printed out in front of me. Just absolutely everything. But like I said, for most of these, especially the bigger companies, the main thing they're looking for is, can you do these leetcode.com questions? Because they know you can either do it or you can't. And they know you can't like do this super crazy elaborate preparation like you can with the behavioral questions. I've been interviewing more for like lead and managerial positions now. And so luckily that's more of those kind of questions. And that's more of like, I'm friends with, like the last interview I did, I was friends with the CTO's girlfriend. And so that's how I was able to do that. And that was a funny one because it was all behavioral, and there's one guy, the guy I was going to replace, drilled me with all these really specific JavaScript questions, like, oh, can you explain hoisting in JavaScript? I'm like, I mean, I remember reading about it. And because I did such a good job on the behavioral side, the CTO called me back and then did another interview with the really technical guy, and he sat beside the technical guy. And he basically offered me the job even though the technical guy was iffy on me. You can get away with that in the smaller companies, but like I said, if the study, just studying those lead code problems, you don't have to lean as much on doing the charm stuff as much if you can really get those lead code problems down.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just in terms of working regular 9 to 5, do you find yourself at your jobs working a lot of overtime, or is it just that 9 to 5 and you can just
So when you're younger, I'm young. I'm still young too. Honest to God, just work. Just work the extra hours. Just don't and you're not really taking that much. If you want to be above average successful, you have to do above average amount of work. Luckily, at the bigger companies, the average level of work's pretty low, because if you just show up, I show up at 9:15. Most people show up at 10:15, and they think I'm just that kind of visibility of showing up kind of early and leaving a bit later, surprisingly goes really far. But the big focus is working on the things that matter, working on the projects that increase revenue or decrease it. But when you're just starting out, honestly, just work that little bit extra, because that's when you're building the relationships with the people who carry on, if that makes sense. Because I go a bit above and beyond, I worked quite extreme overtime last week because we had to, this is a fun story. So Google in Europe, Europe considers Google a monopoly now, and so they told Google that starting January, every single person who gets an Android phone, when they turn it on, they can choose what search engine they can use. And part of System 1 is we own 50 different search engines, but our 50 search engines are basically Bing, Yahoo, and Google results with more ads on it. That's the business model there. So I had to make an Android app in 2 days in order to get in this auction, because we bid on those spots of being one of those default search engines. And so me and 2 other guys were up till 10 o'clock at night and then came in early, but we delivered. But that was an example of working late on something high visibility, because the co-founders and the CTO and the CEO all really wanted this on something that really affects revenue. Because when this comes in on January, it's going to be worth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So working late on those kind of things, I do recommend. Working late on things that don't matter, I fall into that. I did that at GoGuardian. Kind of working because everyone else was working. I don't recommend that, because if you're working on the things that don't matter over time, you're not moving the needle, and you're just going to make yourself more frustrated. And if you get frustrated, you get snippy. If you get snippy, people don't like you, and people don't like you, get fired. So be strategic when working on the overtime things. And always, it sounds really simple, but prioritize working out in the mornings. Prioritize, if you're going through those weeks of working a lot, don't drink. Don't drink any alcohol or anything, because that will affect your sleep. It affects your sleep, it screws up your work, and just screws everything up. Do you have any other questions? No.
But you mentioned you needed a 4-year degree for a visa. Are 3-year degrees fine for visas and whatnot?
Okay, so for any immigration stuff, I'm not an immigration lawyer, but I know little bits and pieces. For the rules, generally, 4-year degree is the safest, but don't be afraid to spend a couple $100 and just call up an immigration lawyer and tell them your exact situation. I actually did this last week because I was looking at some different opportunities. And so I was like, you know what? After Googling for Googling for immigration stuff is like Googling on WebMD when you have a cold, when you start looking for the immigration stuff, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to get deported like tomorrow. So don't even bother going down that Google route. And if you have a really specific kind of question, like just spend the money and call an immigration lawyer. If you want to reach out to me like personally, I can give you the contact of mine. Generally though, I'll just get the 4-year degree. Like, it's an extra year. It's fine.
Yeah, the long-term benefit of having a 4-year degree is much more than just having 3 years.
Yeah.
Long-term benefit for everything, going grad school, going to work in other countries.
And if you want to get an MBA later, like, it's just easy. That's the key. It's really like where I screwed up earlier was I was thinking short term. I remember it took me 5 years to graduate. I was panicking. I'm like, oh, I'm wasting a whole year. And I was at the end of it, I was like, why was I panicking? It's not a big deal at all. It's that thinking long term. That's where like, it's just like compound interest. It doesn't look like anything right now, but after 10 years, you're like, whoa, that's crazy. I'm all the way up here now. So don't be in a rush. Yeah. Like long term. Keep thinking long term.
Yeah, it doesn't mean to stay 10 years doing
Yeah.
undergrad.
Pardon me?
Doesn't need to say 10 years.
No, like that's not thinking long term because you're like, oh, I'm still going to be in school and not making money or yeah. That's also thinking short term.
If you were back in your first year of computer science, what would you do? Like,
I'd study. I'd study way harder. Honest to God, I'd study way harder. I would study way harder because the time you put into studying and stuff now is just makes your life way easier later. Because I'd study way harder. The big thing I've learned in the last couple of years is, because I do a lot of self-studying now, the trick I found was getting a tutor. I have a tutor right now because I'm learning Chinese. And I realized that I wasn't practicing on my own. So now I just pay a person 5 times a week to just like force me to learn Chinese. And when I started doing that, I realized, oh my God, in university, I should just went and saw the tutor. Because then I would have had like an accountability person. So definitely, yeah, study, try to get like really good grades. It's doable. And leverage the tutors as much as possible. And what's the big one? And if you can, try to get a job as a TA or a GA, because that's an accountability thing, because you will learn the course if you have to help other people do it, because otherwise you'll look really silly in front of the other person. So yeah, those are the main ones. Because you have plenty of time during the week. Like if you actually show up to class and like don't bring your laptop and just bring a notebook and sit down and listen, and then after the class look at your notes that night, like that was I remember talking to one of my friends in university who's had one of the best grades. I was like, how do you do it? He's like, honestly, I just show up to class, I don't bring my laptop, I take notes and I review the notes afterwards. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds about right. And make friends with as many people as possible too. Because like I said, I still have friends from university working at Facebook, Google, Amazon, like all these big companies or different startups or anything. And that's how you get the interviews later is by I'll send Rami, I remember when Rami got the Facebook interview, he's like, yo dude, did a recruiter just reach out to you? One just reached out to me. And I was like, yeah. I was like, okay, cool, let's study and try to do this. Yeah, but life's a lot easier if you just study and get good grades now. I think anything else? Okay. If you have any questions whatsoever, reach out to me on LinkedIn or email, and I'll be super happy to answer anything. And if you need any connections or introductions to get some of those interviews, feel free to reach out to me too, because I know a lot of you Windsor people at all these different companies. I think we're good. Thanks very much.
After school, we would love to thank you for being
Oh,
That's
thanks.
some
Oh, this is
swag-
fancy.
There's some swag in there for you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, so on behalf of the school, we'd like to thank you very much for coming. Jamie reached out to me. I don't have to go looking for people. They're always messaging saying, hey, I'm gonna be in town, you know, the odd person every once in a while. So make sure you come to those talks, because I think those are actually the best ones.
Yeah.
Because they're people who graduated from your program, and they did the work, and they did the fails
Yeah,
and the successes. So you can learn from them instead of
Definitely.
making the failures yourself.
correct.